Welcome to IQ HitList Special. I'm Vishwa Sadashivan. IQ HitList Special is Inconvenient Questions' extended 50-minute one-on-one interview that explores the views of an individual that you want to see or that we think you ought to see. Our guest today is a living, breathing symbol of the saying, "You're never too old to learn." Like many women of her time, she got married and settled into a traditional family life at the age of 24. But she then decided to reinvent herself 18 years later and went on to obtain a degree at the age of 42 and then went on to get her master's qualification when she was 60. It's this attitude that's driven her and continues to drive her. She has inspired many generations of civil society activists. For the last 3 decades, this amazing woman has been quite unstoppable in championing the rights of the underprivileged, the marginalised, women's rights issues, migrant workers issues, justice for rape victims. Could say she's been there, done that. If you ask me, she is one of the most deserving names in the Singapore Women's Hall of Fame. What is it that keeps her going and going? Perhaps the answer lies in what she says: "I love life. I love people. I love ideas. I love learning." Her name, Constance Singam. Constance, welcome to HitList Special.
You have done your homework.
I've done my homework. Now you don't know what else I'm going to tell you now.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have someone you have admired for a long time to be here with you. And we're going to have a conversation, right?
Yes.
So don't limit yourself to just talking about serious stuff. You can talk about
Good.
frivolous stuff.
Yes.
We will still respect you. So what's the naughtiest thing you've done in your life?
I told you earlier I was the eldest of a family of 9. And
only one boy, one brother.
One boy.
Well, that's very sad.
And I really can't
And you're the eldest.
think of anything naughty.
You're such a liar. Everybody has a naughty bone. You gotta tell me.
I'm good at not remembering, you know. Not
what you don't want to remember, you just flush it out.
Yes, yes.
No, the reason why I'm asking is, I think there's a side to you.
I'm sure that I have done naughty things.
Yeah.
I just can't remember them.
Yeah, and I'm talking more about a mischievous streak. Mischievous not in a negative sense of the word. About going out there, taking a stand, making a stand. It's about having that streak, And from my experience, the people who do those things in the end are those who've done things when they were young. That's very different. A certain boldness of character. I'm trying to understand that about you. What were some of the things that you did in school? The kind of activities that you took part in? I'm trying to understand what formed this person, Constance Singam. Before you adopted the name Singam.
Yes.
Yeah. Who was this Constance before that?
I think also perhaps it's the life experiences you've had, because when we were very young, when I was 5 years old, my mother took us to Kerala, and then we were
Kerala in India.
In India, we were there for 7 years before we came back. And in those 7 years, I went to school and I went into secondary school. So in the few years, I would have gone to college, but had I stayed down there. But then I came back and I had to start learning a new language completely. And that was quite a traumatic experience.
New language meaning?
English.
Oh, so you only started learning English in your teens?
Yes, it was a second language in a secondary school in the village, So yes, I was 13.
Wow.
Or 11 when I started learning English. And I remember my parents put us in boarding at CHIJ. So we would learn English very quickly,
So were you from a reasonably well-off family?
Well, they were English speaking, yes. Comfortable,
and
I
middle class.
suppose, yes.
Middle class?
Yes.
Okay. So they could afford some of these, because
Yes.
boarding school would be quite expensive.
Well, at CHIJ, two of us were sent. It was an exercise in immersion, but we were there for 3 months, and in the village, the kind of food you get, things like puttu and appam and all that, and
traditional food.
Traditional food, and you come. This is after war, mind you.
Oh yeah,
and
very
you are
British.
Very British. Not only that, it's rationing, and bread and banana. That's size, which looks so black that I wouldn't touch it. So maybe the naughtiest thing I did was
throw away the banana.
To hide the banana in my handkerchief and take it out, because you have to eat everything on the plate, But yes, so those kind of traumas that you go through, and I'm sure lots of people did, lots of people have gone through different phases in their lives when they had to make drastic changes, dramatic changes, learn new languages and learn to fit into a new community.
And not to take it for granted.
Yeah.
Not to take it for granted.
And this is still a struggle as a Singaporean. This is still a struggle. Having always to adjust, having always to adapt, having always wanting to be accepted and recognized. And I think maybe that's what's driving me into civil society too,
Could you explain that a little bit? Why do you feel this need to feel accepted? Is it because you're an ethnic minority, or is it, I don't know, is it your experience during the British occupation?
Oh, I don't think the British occupation had anything to do with it. I think it's coming back to Singapore, and having lived in a village, everybody's relative, Everybody knows everybody. Yes. And you can walk into any home and be accepted. And then you come into a strange country, and you go into boarding, and you're with people you don't know, you had no connection with, and they're all strangers, different cultures, and you're a newbie. Every time you're a newbie, and you want to be accepted by the majority.
Yeah.
So that's always a struggle, and it's still a struggle, because I remember a conversation I had with my mother. This would have been in the 1970s, and we were traveling, and somebody asked, where she was from, and she said she was from India, and she's an Indian. So I told my mother, you can't keep calling yourself Indian, we are now Singaporean. Yes, and we have to say, because we live here, we make our life here, we go to school here, and we had to call ourselves Singaporean. And then, of course, that was 1970s. In 1980s, with the new language policy and CMIO becoming more and more entrenched, now I'm Indian Singaporean, or Singaporean Indian, and I'm not sure, and I'm still want to be just Singaporean.
But is that practical?
Why is it not practical?
I'm just playing that devil's advocate, right? Is it practical for Singapore to completely do away with the CMIO concept, right? CMIO, just for the benefit of our viewers, is the 4 races, right? Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others, mostly Eurasians. There's been quite a bit of discussions lately. Some people are saying CMIO actually has helped build us to where we are.
I know, yes.
Others are saying the time has come for us to move beyond CMIO.
Yeah.
What's your view? Obviously.
My view, I remember having this conversation just a couple of weeks ago and said, well, CMIO category is nothing new. The British had it, It's a continuation of a policy. So my argument against that would be, they were colonizers. So it was for them, it was to their benefit, advantage to separate the different community, divide and rule. But we are an independent nation now, and we don't have to have what's wrong with that is it's become politicized, and so you are judging particular groups by their race, or they seem to be inflicted with certain racial characteristics, stereotypes, and that is damaging for children who are in school, to be stereotyped as an Indian. What are the certain? I'll tell you this story which reminds me. There's this notion that Indians are smelling. smelly, and people, you hear stories like that all
Yeah.
the time. People, I went to an Ayurvedic clinic for a massage. And the therapist said, I have to keep the oil on. Now, I didn't drive there. I had to take a taxi. And it was a Chinese taxi driver. The whole time from Little India to home, I was so embarrassed, and I was cleaning the taxi.
Oh, because the oil was still there.
Because the oil was still there.
No, okay.
It was all right. Yeah, I didn't soil but the smell, I was so embarrassed by the smell. So I was telling this to a friend, and we were talking about it and laughing, and said, I have now reinforced the stereotype of a smelly Indian.
Yeah. No, but if I may ask you, right, there's one school of thought, and it doesn't mean that they are racist, right? There's one school of thought that believes in a very pragmatic way that for us to maintain a certain level of harmony, we need to acknowledge that there are differences between races, and there are cultural differences.
Yes.
And cultural differences mean the way we look at the world around us differently. Right? And there are religious differences as well. So to actually assume that we all absolutely the same is being naive. That's one school of thought, right? And then there's the whole issue of Sinda, Mandaki, and so on, Then and the jury is still out there. But there is validity in the argument that if there are Indians, for example, who would want to go to Sinda because they see a certain comfort in the familiarity, right? So when you're seeking help, especially if you're vernacular educated, you rather go to somebody who speaks your language. So there's some truth to that, right? The question now is, how do we transit from that to being truly open-minded, regardless of race, language, or religion? So here we're not talking about racism, we're talking about maybe racialization. What are your views, your honest views on this?
The Sinda started, I think, 25 years ago. And Kanwajit Soin and I wrote a letter to the newspapers. And Sinda came after that, as a result of that. Because we highlighted the problems Indian kids were having in schools. They were doing badly in science and mathematics, which is very, very strange for Indian kids because they're usually pretty good at maths and science. Yeah. So what's happening? And we raised those issues, And 25 years later, when DPM Tharman went to Sinda to celebrate, he was raising the same questions.
Yeah.
Why over the 25 years hasn't, especially when Sinda was set up, it has not changed? Why are we raising the same? And those kind of questions you need to reflect. There's something really, and which brings me to my own experience.
But just to clarify, there has been, I know because I've been serving on Sinda, there's been a significant improvement in the quality of performance in math and science, for example, among the Indian kids. There has been. The question is whether it's enough. And what's holding them back from performing even better. But if I may go beyond the self-help groups, and I guess my question is larger, is it true that after 50 years of being a nation, being a society, we are still not ready to go beyond race, language, religion? When deciding on things like who should be our Prime Minister, when deciding on things like who should we vote for, right? That's the question that I think warrants a fair bit of discussion.
Reflection. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
We talk about 50 years of independence, but the Chinese, the Malays, and the Indians have lived together in Singapore for more than 200 years.
Yeah.
And if you look at Canada, what's happening in Canada, and the number of minority races who are holding positions of power and influence, and they don't talk in terms of race. And that is the important point. Even in Australia, where most of my family now live, they call themselves as Australians. They don't call themselves as Indians or Singaporeans. When they are asked further, when they're questioned, they will say, well, they were my sisters anyway, born in Singapore. They had emigrated to Australia. But their most proud recognition of themselves, their identity is as Australian first.
Nationality first. Would you not say that that's quite the same for Singaporeans? I feel so. I feel that a lot of Singaporeans
so do
are
I. So why do I have to then say I'm a Singapore Indian or Indian Singaporean? Why can't I just say Singaporean? Now, one of the reasons, one of the is not to highlight race. And when you have these institutionalized categories, then we tend to focus on race.
Because it remains on the radar screen
right.
too often, right?
Not just in the registry, in people's attitudes. You know?
Yeah.
And that, how are we going to get away from that?
Yeah.
You know?
Would you not say that the government has been trying to open up the space for that?
Well, I don't think you can open up space unless you start talking about it. You know, we don't talk. I will tell you, as a minority, I was at a discussion group where the guest was Chinese. And she said she can't speak English very well, although she understood and she can speak. And she said she would prefer to speak Chinese. It's fine. And then everybody else started speaking Chinese. They are English educated. They can speak Chinese very well. But afterwards in my conversation, I could see that they speak English very well. But I never asserted myself and tell, hey, hang on a minute, you know, I'm here. So you shouldn't be speaking Chinese. You should be speaking in a language we all understand.
So why didn't you?
Why didn't I?
Yeah, why didn't
Precisely.
you? Because I've been, whenever I am in a situation where I am an ethnic minority and where, you know, accidentally or otherwise, the conversation goes into a language that I don't understand, like Mandarin, right? I immediately say, excuse me, do you mind speaking English? And immediately there's an apology and they go back. I think it's important for us to give the benefit of doubt, because I strongly believe that very often it's not done done with a vindictive reason.
Yeah, sure.
It's just a little bit of ignorance, or they forget sometimes the context, right? So why didn't you speak up? Why don't you speak up?
And that's the problem. If I couldn't speak up, and I was very tolerant and I was amused by the whole thing.
But you're obviously not amused after that.
After that I wasn't, yes.
Yeah. So,
and after that I was thinking,
the question is,
they
why
were
didn't you?
rude. Why didn't I? I don't know why I didn't.
And
but
you are a fairly vocal person.
Precisely. The next time I will, you know, from that experience, I know that I have to. But if I couldn't do it, can you imagine the kids in school and how they become marginalized and alienated and disempowered?
Okay, so the question, you still haven't answered the question, why?
The question is, then don't racialize. Treat everybody as Singapore. Don't put these kind of categories on people.
Well, I think they're two different things, right? I mean, the way I see it, correct me if I'm wrong. Huh? Number one is racialization, which means that you create organizations like Singam and Daki and so on. You talk about GRC. This is racialization, right? It means you're giving the racial factor greater prominence, right? It's different from racism, right? Now, so that's racialization.
That also leads to racism.
Yeah, it could, it need not, right? The second dimension that you're talking about is insensitivity, which is different from racialization.
Yep,
you see,
sure.
When people break into a language that you don't understand, what happens? You feel alienated at that point in time, especially when you're a significant minority, right? Now that for me is a different sensibility, or points to a lack of a different sensibility, which is about being less sensitive. How do you deal with that?
That will only happen if we are allowed to speak openly.
So why do you feel you're not allowed to speak openly today?
Today
Why wouldn't you?
I am speaking openly.
No, precisely.
But what I'm saying is there's this Racial Harmony Act, so you cannot have a public discussion on race or religion.
This is a public discussion. It's going on.
Come on, Viswa, you know what I mean.
I don't actually.
You are you are in control. You are an intelligent man.
Yeah.
You're in control of this space. Okay.
Okay.
But say if we have people we need to speak to and speak with and have a discussion and open their minds to, if they are insensitive, that these kind of acts are you're not being sensitive to the feeling of others.
Okay, I'm trying to understand this, Constance.
Yeah.
I'm not being difficult. I'm just trying to understand it because I have many of my friends, Chinese, Malay, Indian, all of us, who believe in similar things, that we need to move away from these things, right? On various occasions in a public domain, I have talked about this. In public domain, even with media coverage, I've talked about this simply because when your heart is clean, you know why you're doing it. You're not being racist, you're not putting down any other race, you're just appealing for greater understanding across the race. And in such circumstances, I don't think the government or anyone is actually restricting you. I don't feel that. I've not experienced it. Of course, it requires greater exercise of judgment, right? Now, it's a fine line, but we need to know broadly where the line is and move back, you see. So I'm saying, I'm very comfortable talking about why is it that we should not hold back when you feel offended. You should let the other parties know that what they've done is offensive.
Yeah.
Not intentionally, but offensive. That's the only way we can start understanding each other and becoming more sensitive, right? So I'm still curious. Why do you feel that you can't? I feel that the space for this discussion has opened up. Of course, it's different when you go out there and make racist slurs.
Not racist.
That's not what you're talking about.
No, not racist slurs. Can we, for instance, go to Hongland Park and have a forum or a forum anywhere else and talk about race issues?
How do you define race issues?
Say, for instance, we can talk about the language policy, okay, and we can talk about marginalization of various communities and how the fact that they are being isolated or they are withdrawing from mainstream society because they feel marginalized because of the color of their skin or because of their religion, and they are not fully part of the wider Singapore society. Can we have these kind of discussions?
I'm not sure, but have you tried?
Well, there's this law, which is my problem. When you're talking about civil society, all right, are we opening up? I don't know, because we never know where the OB markers are.
Yeah, that's
and
one.
that is the limit that stops us from having these kind of discussions.
I agree.
Because we don't know.
We don't.
We don't know.
But I guess it's in times like that it becomes even more important for us to have a robust civil society, right? And let's face it, the moment you're in civil society, in any society in the world, you run the risk.
Oh yes, governments don't like.
Anywhere, I mean,
governments
you talk
don't
about
like
USA,
society, yeah.
you will still run the risk of that, right? The civil rights movement in USA, you think
They got arrested.
They got arrested, they got beaten up.
Yeah.
This wasn't that long ago,
Yeah.
right? So I think if you want to be an agent of change, which I believe you are, you have a fairly effective one, I'm sure you are aware that you are undertaking some risk, correct?
I was a scary cat.
Yeah, but the point is, you have survived because people do see where you're coming from. I believe that, okay? You're vocal, you're inconvenient for sure, but there's a line between being inconvenient and being mischievous.
Yeah.
I don't think people, at least people I've spoken to, nobody views you as being mischievous in intent, but you're inconvenient. You're a pain.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to say, it's good to be a pain. You wear it as a badge of honor because you're pushing the boundaries, right? But with the heart in the right place. So my question again to you, what's stopping you from sharing perspectives in the best interest of the country? As long as you don't make racist or other kinds of slurs.
I think, I do believe there are small groups which are doing precisely that.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, you have organizations. I don't. You see, I don't
You're being
want.
a scary cat again.
No, I don't want to.
Okay, you don't want to mention names.
Mention names.
No, it's all right.
So
you don't need to
I
mention
don't
names.
want. Yes, you know. You know, the one incident that that disturbed me was the riots, so-called riots in Little
The Little
India.
India riots. Okay.
And how much of that had to do with the fact, one is that foreign workers are very badly treated and abused.
Which is a subject close to your mind.
Yeah. And then the second is, what did racism had to do with it?
Was there racism?
I hear stories.
Okay.
Yeah. And harassment. Again, I'm not quite sure how far. Well, you
How far you can
probably
talk about this?
You probably sense this.
No, I wouldn't censor this. It's going on.
Harassment by the police. You know.
These are not facts. These are what you've heard.
Yes, anecdotes.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
They're not facts. Because if you go to Little India, you'll find that there's so much police presence, and young national service boys who are serving their national service in the police, what would they know? How sensitive can they be? What kind of understanding of culture, various culture, sensitive, have they been sensitized, you know? And so that riot was waiting to happen because of all these various issues, you know. But the government's, none of that came out in the report, nor in the Shrestham's report. And the ultimate conclusion was alcohol was a problem, you know. And you're then not really going into the depths of that situation. It should never have happened. Now, of course, they have. It's also the logistics and this of organizing that, you know. But none of that discussion came out. And how do you sensitize people if you put all this kind of issues under the carpet and not discuss it openly?
I hear you.
You know?
I hear you. I'm not sure whether it's a matter of putting it under the carpet or whether it's an unwillingness to confront it openly because of the sensitivities. You see, the truth is, I think many Singaporeans, many people, even in government, would agree with your point of view generally that if we do not start talking openly
about it,
right?
yes.
If we do not start talking openly about the erstwhile taboo topics like race, language, or religion, we are not going to start the process of sensitization of younger generation, for example, right? On the other hand, we also know how mercurial and volatile this topic can be if handled wrongly. Even you would agree, right? I mean, the wrong choice of words sometimes, the wrong expression when you make a statement, when you talk about God, when you talk about a certain person's religion being a motivator for terrorism, you know, there are so many things that could go wrong in a conversation such as this. So I can also understand why there is a reluctance to open the space for discussion overnight, because we're not sure whether people are ready for a sensible discussion on this, and the key word is sensible. So how do
When
you
will people
manage?
be ready?
Good.
Maybe keep saying this, you know.
So what is your view? How do we go about doing this?
We will never be ready unless we start talking about it.
Agreed. So concrete recommendation. If you are given the opportunity today to have a conversation with PM Lee and say, and he asks you, so Constance, you've been the mother of civil society. Somehow he gives you a very aged sort of thing, you know,
Well,
you're
like,
mother of
now
civil
they're
society.
referring to me as the grandmother.
Grandmother of civil society.
Some of my friends jokingly refer to me as.
So,
No, you know.
No, so if I ask you as a prime
Yeah.
minister, if I'm the prime minister, so Constance, you're the grandmother of civil society, and you've been around looking at the civil society landscape for 30 over years. What is the one thing that you think my government should do? How would you answer it?
I would go to the Minister for Education.
Okay.
You know, I have a cousin who emigrated to Canada last year, and he was saying that the kids in primary school, primary 1, primary 2, are already being sensitized about race issues, you know,
How?
about treatment. They have curriculum which makes
Okay.
the difference.
Okay, so it's sort of part of the curriculum.
It's yes. So they become sensitized at an early age, you know, and so they grow up, which is why you have a mature society which can deal with these issues. But unless you start at that early age, we are never going to be ready.
So it's already happening, right?
Here?
Yeah.
Is it happening?
Starting? I mean, you said, yeah,
I
sensitized.
was talking about in Canada it is
Yeah, but
happening.
here, is it
but
happening?
here, I don't think it's happening. I don't know.
Well, maybe not in primary school, but certainly from secondary school, I'm aware that some of these issues are slowly being introduced.
I think it's probably in GP.
No,
and
even
those-
secondary school now,
I see.
under character education and citizenship, right? I think it's slowly being introduced. Now, I mean, for some of us, it may be a little too slow, but I think it's already started. There's already recognition that we need to understand some of these things. So it's happening, right? So education, you're right. Education
Yeah.
is definitely a way to go about, very important. What do you think of the role of civil society? What do you think is necessary, assuming that civil society is a very important fulcrum for democratization, for empowerment, right? What do you think is necessary to build civil society in Singapore to complement what the government is doing?
One of the problems is lack of space,
Okay?
lack of funding. You see, if your society is really serious about, because that's another thing, that the problem in Singapore is everybody is confronted with lack of space, everybody is confronted with cost of living and cost of properties, and so civil society is even more difficult, you know. You can't say, if you're a human rights group, you can't even find a place where you can speak, hold a forum.
Okay.
You know, after the Little India riots, this particular group kept having to move from one location to another, because as soon as they confirm one location, the police will go and question the owner. Okay, so that kind of harassment limits the space that you have. So those who are being very brave, and the human rights group is currently the bravest. 35 years ago, it was AWARE, women's rights. Now it's human rights. There isn't that space, you know. There is even social enterprises who are dealing with very safe subjects can't find a place to have to hold a forum, to have a location, and that's important. So if government is really serious about respecting civil society and valuing civil society, then I think it should do something about.
So when you say space, you're talking about physical space?
Physical space.
I mean,
that's one.
Okay.
Physical space. Another one, if again, I go back to human rights groups. they get, and some of these groups get gazetted as political organization. As soon as they are gazetted political organization, nobody wants to give funds.
Okay.
So how do you function? It's a big struggle. I mean, I can understand. It's even more serious when it's human rights. When we first started, in a way, it was the same story, So it will take them another 10, 15 years before that space. But it's just so. I don't think that unless even when we talk about foreign workers' rights and domestic work, abuse of domestic workers, there have been issues raised by NGOs for the last 15, 20 years. And it's still happening because it's not being discussed. We have limited media space. I mean, the social network has helped. But how many people does that reach, you see?
Yeah.
So the main...
Which brings me to the larger point here, right? I think nobody would disagree with you that there needs to be more space. Not just physical space, but access and space, mental space, space for discussion, right?
Space for entry to schools, for instance, to educate, give talks,
absolutely.
Those kind of things.
So there needs to be an opening up of the space for discussion of these matters, right? Now, I'm sure you'd agree that it has been opening up, but maybe not as fast as it should or can. That's number one. Number two, we certainly can do with a lot more transparency about the rules, the laws, and so on. It needs to be made clear under what circumstances you can, you cannot, right? Now, thirdly, it is clear that when you are in a space, in a multiracial space, multi-religious space, especially when you're focused on not disrupting the harmony, which none of us really wants, right? There would be a certain amount of concern about whether people can exercise the judgment when they're required to, right? Now, that is one concern that I think parents have, right? I've been talking to parents and saying, why don't we do more about this? Talk, Then they said, no, they're not prepared to talk to the children about this because they're not equipped, right? So the end of it comes down to discussions and discourse. And this is the point I'd like to raise. And my own sense of you as a person, I've known you for some time, what I think works for you is that you are not confrontational. You're not. You've got very strong views on things, but you do not come across as someone who wants to go there and bang fight, which is a reason why people do listen to you.
Well, I think when we first started 35 years ago, we were seen as confrontational. We were seen as noisy.
Because you were new. It was a new phenomenon, right?
Yes.
But over time, I'm sure you'd agree with me.
Yeah.
It is not what you say, it's how you say it.
That's right.
It's how you say it.
Yeah.
Right? Now, so it takes time for conversations to turn into dialogue. A true dialogue.
But also, Viswa, you have to realize we learned along the way, But unless you give people opportunity to speak and discuss, they're not going to learn how to do it. I have another theory. Is the lack of language to debate.
Language,
vocabulary. Yeah. And sometimes when I see young people getting into trouble because they would have said something or asked something.
Wrong choice of words.
And I'm now going, when I travel overseas, or when I go to Australia, for instance, I am very, very aware of how limited our vocabulary in Singapore is.
Accepted vocabulary. Are you talking about that?
No, I'm talking about vocabulary in general.
In general, okay.
Yes,
okay.
I think we should do a study about how many words we use. I love to read foreign newspapers and magazines because of the language, the nuances. We don't.
Yeah. So it ends up being very sharp.
Very sharp.
Yeah.
And even if they don't mean it, or because they don't have the practice.
Yes.
So
I think you're so right. Okay? So the question is, what do we do about it? There are two ways, right? One is you do behind the scenes discussions.
Yeah.
But that is effective, but it doesn't create awareness.
No, because you're just speaking to the choir.
To a small group of people, right?
Yeah.
And then very often to the converted.
Yeah.
Secondly, you could try and speak at Speaker's Corner. And as you said, there are various limitations and so on, because it's a very open place. You have no idea who. It could be a terrorist fellow walking there, and
No, you can't, because you have to register.
No, what I mean is in the audience. In the audience, he may come and blow you up. So people are naturally concerned. I mean, you don't have no idea who's going to walk in and what kind of crowds are going to come in. So that's the second thing, right? Similarly, getting licenses to speak as a political organization may have restrictions. What about this platform? Look at it. The reason why we created IQ is to allow for various voices to speak, not unchallenged. What I'm doing is I'm challenging you, I'm questioning you. Not because I disagree necessarily, but so that you have a chance to explain what you mean, right? Now, this interview is going to go out unedited. And I expect you to know that, right? Now, slowly, people will start having the opportunity to listen to various ideas. You don't expect everyone to agree with you, right? You don't. That's civil society. You want people to disagree with you, but tell you perhaps why. So I think the online space is the space for this, right? Question is, why aren't enough civil society movements, organizations, tapping the online space?
Resources, lack of resources.
That's one.
Yeah.
But how much of resources do you think you need for a blog? You don't.
Look, I have a blog, but I haven't had time in the last 2 years to, because when you're in civil society, you have to earn a living, so you're doing a full-time job, all right? And then you're doing voluntary work. And that's a lot of work. That's almost sometimes takes...
I agree.
Yes.
But my dear...
And you have no money, okay?
But my dear, let me tell you, that's labor of love.
Life
if you want to be a civil society activist, a participant, then that's the way the cookie crumbles. Otherwise, don't enter the fray. You have had to make sacrifices. But I wouldn't even call them sacrifices. You're doing it because you believe in what you're doing. Right? Name me one country in the world where someone who is driving civil society is driving around in a limo.
Yeah.
It's hard work. It eats up your space,
resources,
your bandwidth. So either you are serious about it, you go in and do it, or you don't. Right? So bottom line here is, why aren't civil society groups, number one, using a lot more of space? Online. Number two, why aren't you doing a lot more hard negotiations with the authorities behind the scenes? Hard negotiations.
I think that's happening.
But not enough, right?
They have to invite you, they have to listen to you.
But I think you need to be...
meeting with them.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But I think a lot more effort can be put in that. So my question is really these two.
The more powerful you are, the more you have to make that effort.
Yeah.
So government has to make that effort too.
Yes, but I think let's assume the government is open but not welcoming. Like any government.
That's all right.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So the onus therefore is on civil society groups to think of clever, innovative ways to get into the meeting room. And once you're in the meeting room, how do you make change happen? You tell me. In a system like Singapore, what do you want is change. How do you make change happen? Let me ask you, do you think change will happen if you go and bang your head against a wall?
The change happens when people's minds change, not necessarily the government.
Yeah.
people's mind, the society's mind. And that to happen, you have to have more open discussions. And the only place we can now have open discussions is the social media.
Yeah.
But how many people read social media?
Okay, good point.
You know?
But once you start dealing with things that are relevant and interesting and do it in a manner that's relevant and interesting, it's a slow climb. Slowly, it starts gaining traction. But if you don't use it in the first place, then it's not going to grow. You see, so what I'm saying is, first, I think we need to believe that we don't have that many options. Use the options as best as you can. Avoid being cynical. Would you agree?
Yeah, but civil society, people in civil society are struggling. I'll tell you the Aware story. All right? Till 2009, we were struggling. We were mostly we had 1 or 2 members of staff, full-time staff. And most of the work was done by volunteers. And because also we want to be as democratic as possible, we want to be very, very different from the dominant culture.
Yeah.
And be democratic and egalitarian. Anybody could become a member. Anybody could sign in and become a member.
Sure.
All right? And that is why, and we didn't have the time to check, we didn't have the resources to check everybody's individual background, because we were open. We were an open organization. And it got taken over in 2009.
But the interesting thing is, it got reversed.
It did.
So you see, at the end of the day, it works. When you empower people.
Yes.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, people, civil society people, work very hard. We have a history. Civil society has been demonized over the last 50 years, okay, by various instruments of the state, you know.
Okay.
And so not very many people want to be.
But don't
Look, Viswa, just as much as you say, yes, people think I am a good model of civil society, but there are also people who avoid me.
That they think you are devil incarnate.
You know, yes. They didn't want to have anything to do with me because, you know, if they speak to me, then the government is watching them speaking to me, and they see me as anti-government. You know, every civil society member is seen as anti-government by the wider society because that has been the narrative.
But isn't that the narrative more or less in most countries?
No. Civil society
depends on how you look at it.
Activists have a respected role in society.
So
people don't demonize them. Government may, but people don't.
So how would you like to see the change happen besides space? I mean, what is the fundamental way in which you'd like to see it change?
Well, one of the fundamental ways you can see that government respects the work and values the work done by civil society is to give them awards on National Day.
Well, I think that's a brilliant idea. Recognition.
I mean, because there's so many people who work so hard and who are not recognized and make so much sacrifice, they need to be recognized, which is why with a group of people, civil society activists, we set up the Singapore Advocacy Awards.
Which is a great idea.
It is struggling.
It's struggling. And I guess the point I'm making is that's where leadership counts, right? I mean, where you are trying to open up white space, you know, where nobody has traveled. It's pioneering efforts. Whenever you are in any form of pioneering effort, you take hits, you take knocks, because the incumbents generally do not like change, right? But that's where I think your approach and the approach of a few other enlightened members of civil society is working, which is you believe in discussion and discourse.
Yes, Mr. But people like me and people like us make a lot of sacrifices. There are young people who are active and who and people like me don't have to worry about. Anyway, I'm retired. Going to be 80 next year or this year, but don't have to worry about earning an income. But there are people who are active civil society members who can't get jobs.
Yeah.
You know?
Why they can't get jobs because
they
they're not
can't
qualified?
get jobs. No, very highly qualified, but because of what they are doing, they can't get jobs. And there are lots of people, individuals like that, who are. So employment is another issue, you know, and people are scared to become more involved. But I have to say, though, there are lots of young people who are now coming into, but also those young people are not worrying about, you know, this is the generation, the new generation. They don't have to worry about full employment, or you know, they do part-time work because they want a balanced life.
Yeah.
So there is that new generation of civil society activists who do. Who are not in full employment, so they can then pursue their passions. You know.
So I mean, we need to wrap the discussion, but let me ask you this: do you feel that after 30 over years of civil society in Singapore, we are now at a time where there is significant opportunity for growth and flourishing? Would you say that this is the time where we can?
I'm not sure about that, you know. I think young people are becoming more open to idea of activism, but people also work very long hours, you know, and that's one of the huge problems. I mean, people don't have time for social life, no time to have boyfriends, girlfriends, no time for each other.
And so procreation is a problem.
And so procreation is a problem. So civil society also, you know, it's also, it's so many constraints that we have, you know.
But regardless, would you say that there is, in terms of the spirit?
I think if the cabinet and if the leadership at the highest level can pass a message on to every level of management, right up to the policeman at the door, then I think I can see change happening. But the laws are still in place, the policies are still in place, the attitude is still in place. So young people who are coming forward are doing not because attitude has changed, but because they are braver, and they are prepared to make sacrifices. And it's a new generation because you cannot stop ideas anymore.
Sure. So
it's not only the Straits Times that we read now. We have all sorts
online.
You know, resources that we can, where the ideas come from. So it's that's making the difference.
It is that, and that is going to continue to make the difference.
Yes, that's right.
It is, and because that's a new way.
That's
the
a new way.
Is. And the good thing is we have a pipeline. I do believe, like you, that we have a pipeline of bright young people with the hearts in the right place who are prepared to invest the time and energy to do it.
And a lot of them would have been educated overseas and empowered in the process, you know.
So as long as you have these people who are going in with the heart in the right place and pushing the boundaries in an intelligent way, and as long as it is not unduly adversarial, I think we will see change. Like the way you have made change happen.
Well,
because
it's not, no, let's be fair. Aware was an amazing organization.
I'm not talking about you as in just you. I'm talking about you as in the organizations. You and the organizations that you've represented have made change because you believe in negotiations and mediation and discussing, finding common ground. Right? And that's been your style, and that's been the style of several other members of civil society who have found success. Push the boundaries, but don't go there with a sledgehammer.
I don't know whether we have anybody. In Singapore, who carries a sledgehammer?
No, what I'm saying is, the government sometimes is known to be carrying a sledgehammer.
Yes.
But even the government is beginning to realize, I hope, that approach doesn't work. Right? So it's really about finding the common ground in terms of issues and finding the common ground in terms of the way we do it. And that's been a big success factor for you. And I believe that's the reason why you command so much of respect among people.
Thank you.
Including me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Constance,
I am very touched. Thank you.
And I mean that. Also because you're my fellow countrymen. woman. Singaporean. That was Constance Singam, who for the longest time was constantly Singam. You know, I mean, it's constantly a lioness, right? This has been IQ HitList Special. Log in to our website, www.iq.sg, to watch out for our next IQ HitList. Click the links to see other guests who have appeared on our previous episodes. Post your comments on social media and let us know if there's someone you'd like us to interview on HitList.